Hello everyone, and today we're going to take a look at Leap of Fate. It styles itself as a sort of roguelite mixed with top-down shooter with a bit of an interesting twist on the procedural generation that games like this tend to use. Now, what's standard for a lot of games that use roguelike elements is to take one of the main elements of roguelikes, besides things like turn-based combat and things like that, which is the ability to procedurally generate your levels. That every playthrough is different because the levels are different every time. Whether or not the actual level is a different tile set each time, that depends on the game, but even if it's the exact same sort of beginning, like say Enter the Gungeon for instance, the rooms are still different every time. This game does do that in a way, although it is styled a lot differently than that, but it has something else going for it, and that is the idea of procedurally generated skill trees, which is something I've never actually seen before. The game generates a skill tree for every playthrough, 3 of them actually, and they are ordered differently every time, which can actually change a lot about your playthrough, and that's something that I've got to give the game credit for. Every playthrough does feel significantly different. So let's jump into it. This is a game by Clever Plays, and it is available on Steam right now for $16. So not too bad, a fairly bite-sized price, I feel, for a pretty bite-sized game in terms of length. You can beat this fairly quickly. My successful run was about 40 minutes. But as you can see, there are multiple characters here, and the way this works is you'll start with this one, and as is standard for a lot of roguelites, you have an out-of-game progression system, which means that, you're slowly unlocking things that are permanent upgrades outside of your actual in-game progression, by which I mean, every time you start the game, of course, you're going to be gaining power differently, but that's going to reset every time you die via permadeath. However, at the end of every run, you're also gaining permanent upgrades that last forever between each run, and every character has this non-procedurally generated unlock system. And there are these missions that I'll show you once we get in the game that are generated to every level, more or less, that you can complete, and completing a specific number of missions will unlock these various permanent upgrades that will be on that character forever, as long as you play them. So every character is very different. As you can see, you can actually look at what they start with. This character starts with 5 health, 2 keys, one of these energy cells. Again, I'll explain all of this once we get into it. Every character has a different basic attack, a different movement ability based on... the game is very heavily based on your ability to shadow walk. You have a movement-based ability, which is very important. A dodge, essentially. And a glyph, which is a secondary fire, essentially a magical or techno-magical weapon. And both of these have a limited number of uses, as indicated by these little blue pips here. And you will be upgrading yourself in-game through the skill tree, as well as getting these permanent out-of-game progression upgrades as you complete your actual missions. Now, this is, I think, a way that they've put in the game to help actually limit the effectiveness of RNG, essentially, because of course, since the skill trees are random, you never know exactly what you're going to get. So I think they've put this system in here both because a lot of people like the out-of-match progression of a lot of roguelites that are going these days, and because this helps you limit how much of a factor the random nature of the skill trees has on your character, because every character eventually, as you complete missions with them, will start with a specific kit besides their abilities that they always start with, that kind of rounds them out with some skills pre-purchased, essentially, when you begin the game. Now, every character, as I mentioned, is very, very different, and they actually get pretty challenging. Now, every character has a story. They have an intro cinematic that you will see when you first play with them, and they also have possible futures. These are their fates. And you unlock these in different ways. Usually there's one for beating hard, one for beating normal, and then 3 for doing different things. And these are very well illustrated, kind of graphic novel-esque, hand-drawn cutscenes that are actually pretty good. The voice acting is a little hit and miss, but the animation, the actual hand-drawn nature of them is really impressive looking, and I like the way they look a lot. So this is cool. You unlock different sort of futures, different conclusions and fates for each character. And like I mentioned, every character does play very, very differently. Razumov here plays very different from all the others because of the soul mechanic that he uses. But I'm going to show you my favorite character, which is Mukai. So, yeah, let's jump into it. She's the only character that doesn't fire projectiles as her actual basic attack. She uses a blade. And her sort of special is that she starts with very low health. Originally she starts with 3, but I have upgraded her via this to start with 4. So she's the most fragile character to begin with. And she also has a shield that allows her to take 1 hit at the beginning of every battle before actually taking any damage, which is nice. But she's still quite fragile. However, she is fast. So let's jump in. And here's how it works. You'll notice a bit of a similarity to another game with Fate in its title, Hand of Fate. And here's the missions. Oh god. Yeah. Now, as you notice, level 4, level 5, as you complete more and more of the missions for a character, the missions that you get when you start a new game will be set farther in, so you'll have to get farther every time to start completing missions and unlocking more stuff. The game makes it harder for you to continuously unlock stuff, essentially. But, let's go. So you are given a set of cards, and you will go through, this is the Crucible of Fates, sort of an illusionary arena, and you will choose cards and go through your playthrough via these actual sort of cards like Hand of Fate, essentially. So this is a combat card, very, self-explanatory. 2 skulls means it has 2 waves of enemies that spawn, and here's how it works. So it is top-down, as you can see, kind of an isometric perspective, although of course it's not 2D. And you'll be given a wave of enemies to kill. Oh god. And you will have to try to not die, essentially. And there's a lot of enemy variety in this game, first of all, but there's also a significant amount of required kind of skill, I would say, in using your abilities correctly. Now, this character, I've unlocked the ability for her basic attack to actually reflect projectiles if you time it properly, which is useful, but her attack speed isn't particularly fast, as you saw there. I got hit. Now, one thing to note is mana is very important. You see this little purple orbs here. You'll see these. This is mana, and mana is not a resource you use for casting spells. Mana is currency in this game. It's like your gold, basically. Now, you get mana for completing things because anything with a chest in the end of it will give you mana. So, as you can see, this one doesn't have a reward, but it's only 1 skull, which means it's only 1 wave of enemies. So, killing enemies with my normal basic attack doesn't give mana normally. Killing enemies with what are called special kills, which are using things like environmental kills, using your secondary, your glyph, or using your shadow walk if it does damage, which hers does. As you can see, it shoots this little red projectile. Those give you mana for kills. So you have to use your special abilities to kill enemies in order to get this currency. This currency is what you will use both to upgrade your own abilities and to purchase things in shops, as I'll show you now, conveniently. So in shops, you can see here, there are various things for sale. I can't afford most of them, and I don't want to buy anything right now because I don't have any upgrades, and I don't really have a use for that key right now, so I'm just going to teleport out of this card, and here we go. As you can see, I mentioned the game is quite bite-sized. It goes very quickly. I'm already most of the way through the first level here, but the levels do get bigger every time, and there are 6, if you're curious. There are 6 of these decks that you will go through in a given play of the game. So this is a mystery card. These are usually filled with loot and things of that nature, but they always require a key to unlock, so I'm going to do that. And in this case, it is a modification to the deck, which allows me to reveal where the boss is at any given time. Now, I don't want to use it right now because there are only 3 possible locations where it could be, so it's not that hard to figure out, but I'll use it at the beginning of the next one. So let's do this combat. As you can see, this has a bigger chest as a reward, but it's also a 2 enemy wave. Oh, and this is a modifier. Alright. So this will... some combats will have modifiers to them. You can skip the modifier for a cost in this currency here, which I'll explain in a moment, or you can accept it and get a reward if you complete the combat successfully. In this case, it replaced my glyph with a random one that's going to do all kinds of things. Every time I cast it, it's going to change what it actually does. So I don't really mind that because she's got a really reliable dodge and her attack is quite powerful, so yeah. Now I want to be getting these special kills, which I haven't been doing because I need mana. So red stuff, as you can see, these red cars will explode. Anything with a red outline is an explosive obstacle that can be destroyed and will do damage to you and enemies. And any enemy killed by that is considered a special kill, which will give you mana. Like that. I got a key for completing it, and I got some other stuff. So, another thing to explain these energy cells here, as you can see, your Shadow Walk and your Glyph have a limited number of uses. She starts with 4 of each, and they're recharged at the beginning of every combat, but you can only use them that many times in the combat. So you have to manage your resources carefully between, you know, how many enemy waves there are and how many you figure you will need to save for the last one. But you can also use these energy cells once you run out of charges to use the ability again. So one energy cell is one use of either of those abilities if they've run out of charges. So you can essentially save those for when you're in a pinch, which is a nice feature to have. This is a challenge. Obviously, they give you a specific challenge and a reward if you complete the challenge. It's not a difficult concept to figure out. These are an interesting one. You gotta kill the marked enemy last, which is kind of difficult with this character because she's got a powerful AoE attack as her normal basic move, and she also, I've unlocked the ability for her to leave these clouds of, like, miasma behind when she kills an enemy. So that's a problem, but I was able to successfully do it, and I'm gonna kill the enemies with my glyph so I get mana from them. And there we go, that is a maximum health upgrade, which is permanent to this playthrough. So yeah, as you can see, the game goes quite quickly. There's a lot of stuff happening, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It's not a difficult game to figure out. And it all rolls through very fast. Now, I have a feeling that the price point of the game being fairly low, I mean, it's not like $5 or anything, but it's also not like uber expensive, combined with the very, very fast nature of individual playthroughs, will have people kind of maybe convinced that that's one of the advantages of it, I guess, because some roguelites have very long play times. This does not. As I said before, one of my successful actual run-throughs of the game from beginning to end was 40 minutes, which isn't really that long. I mean, even an Isaac run-through tends to be longer than that, unless you're like a speedrunner or get a really good synergy or something. So let's look at upgrades now. You will come across upgrade cards, and these are your 3 skill trees. However, you can't choose any one you want. As you saw on the thing, the upgrade card had a blue symbol, which means it is the mobility skill tree. So you can't choose whatever skill tree you want every time you go into an upgrade card. The upgrade card will have either 1, 2, or 3 skill trees available to you when you go into it, which is interesting. I guess that's just to give you, it's to kind of limit the number of choices you have at any given time. So this is the skill tree. As you can see, I already have this one purchased because that is something that, you know, she starts with because of that's just one of her abilities. But these are the things I can buy. So I could either get Haunting Wind, which will make my Shadow Walk actually do damage to anything I Shadow Walk through, or I can get Boom Shadow, which will make the projectile that the Shadow Walk shoots actually have an AoE to it, which I do want, so I'm gonna get that. And you only get 1 upgrade per upgrade card. So every time you purchase one from an upgrade card, that's it, that's all you get, no matter how much mana you actually have, so use it wisely. Now you can backtrack. As you can see, these cards have symbols left on them, like this is a health symbol, which shows that there is an uncollected health globe in that card. So similar to things like Isaac and Into the Gungeon, you can go back to like a previous room, you know, to collect resources you left behind. This is the same concept, it just happens to be in a card form. So I want to show you one more thing. Notice these. You have extra cards that you can earn in various ways, and there are always these 3 extra cards available on every level. There is a clockwork key available, 1 that you can normally get on every level. That's usually a reward in a chest at the end of one of the combat cards. And since there's only 1 combat card left, I can tell you that it's definitely in this one, so I'm going to beat this combat to get it. And that will allow you to actually select one of those 3 cards, whichever you would like. And there, as you can see now, that projectile that my Shadow Walk fires out has an AoE. which is useful for gathering mana, by the way. Use her glyph to do some damage over time and get some mana. And what that means is it allows you to choose, I suppose. It limits the RNG of the game a little bit by allowing you to deliberately choose to go into a specific card. You always get a choice that way. Okay, I want to finish things off with that so I get more mana. There we go. And this should have a clockwork key in it, and there it is. Now, occasionally you'll be able to earn more than one on a level by going into a mystery card or something like that, or even buy one in a shop with this currency here. But you will only ever get one of them as a reward from a combat. So now that I have it, I can choose one of these. So I can either get a glyph, a new glyph, I can get an upgrade, which is, you know, just like the upgrade card I showed you, or I can get a gift, which will usually have some keys, some health, some energy cells, just a random assortment of any number of those things in it. In this case, I want a new glyph to show you more of the abilities. Now, this game has a huge variety of these glyphs, which is really cool. Ooh, I like this one. Apocalypse Now. So you can, your glyphs don't replace each other. As far as I know, you can hold just about as many as you want, and you can switch between them in real time just by doing this. And I like how almost everything in this game has flavor text, by the way. It's really cool. So, in this case, Apocalypse Now summons meteors. It only has 2 charges, however, so if I just use it, there it is. As you can tell, that's really good AoE damage and really good for harvesting mana from enemies. So I'm going to keep that, but 2 charges is limiting. Although having some extra energy cells is nice. So, at the end, at some point at least, in every level will be the boss, the Guardian. And, well, let's fight it. I have full health and a shield, so let's do it. Now, the high points of this game would be the variety, I would say, and the actual random skill tree. So the variety is a high point because there's a lot of enemy and boss variety in this game, like a lot. Every deck uses a different tile set and a different set of enemies, so you don't really get tired of the enemies that much because there are so many of them, and like I said, every single... Oh yeah, I forgot that she starts with levitation now, that's sweet. Every single deck has a different set, and that's a lot. So this first deck always uses this city rooftop theme, and like city alleyways and things, and it uses mostly like police and things like that. But the second level, which you're going to see soon, tends to use this sort of like human experimentation lab theme and some other nasty stuff. And a completely different set of enemies and bosses are possible in that particular tile set. And every deck is like that. All 6 of them have a completely different set of bosses, levels, obstacles, interactable, explosive obstacles, and enemies, which is nice. That helps with the variety a lot. Now, another thing to notice is how flexible your shadow walk is. You can go really, really far with it. Wherever you point the mouse cursor, you will end up. So if I want to point it all the way over here, I'll make it all the way over there. So using it in this capacity is very useful. You use it as a dodge and to do damage depending on what kind of shadow walk your character has and what kind of skills that you've invested into it. So there we go. I was able to beat that one, and now in order to advance to the next deck, you walk into this and you get a little bit of dialogue here. So let me do this. Boop. Dialogue with this guy.
Hey, Mukai, why do you wear your right arm like that? I mean, I thought you only had one.
You get this weird eyeball man. I'm not sure exactly what he represents, but he seems to be connected to this crucible in some way. And every character has various different bits of dialogue with him, which is actually pretty well done because everyone's different. And then he will give you a free upgrade from, you can choose one of your skill trees to upgrade essentially, and it doesn't cost any mana. Again, this is to help with the RNG of the game, I feel. So in this case, I think I want... Chain Lightning is nice, but I think I want Double Trouble, because having the AoE on that projectile is nice. Having 2 of them that both deal AoE seems really useful, so I'm going to get that. And there we go. Now, we are going to the second deck, and the cards will be a different color. The deck will be a little bit longer. That's talking about Clark's third law, which is cool. And the tile sets and enemies will all be different, which I'll show you. So, here we go. And I can use this to show you too, so use that, and now I know that's where the boss is. So if I make it all the way down to there, I can fight the boss and move on to the third one, as long as I live. And this also, by the way, shows you your upgrades that you have, so you can refer back to all the various things that you can do at any given time. So let's, I guess, kind of recap. It is a pretty fast-paced, rather hectic, top-down shooter style of roguelite that is heavily based on random generation, but does it in such a way so as to not make it feel as if you're getting screwed over by RNG constantly, because the random generation is mostly based around the actual decks that you'll be fighting through, as well as the skills that you'll have access to. Now, the skill trees, while being random, are not a complete random mishmash of nonsense. They all have a certain order of things. For instance, you won't find the skills that I'm investing into now that enhance the ability of the projectiles that the Shadow Walk fires, unless you actually first have the projectiles. You won't just find skills that you can't use, which is important. So that's not to say that the skill tree is so completely random that it becomes useless. It is randomized in its order, but the order still has to make sense. Oh. Okay, so if I complete this challenge, I get a silver rune. This is another thing to talk about. The rune system, as many as there are, by the way, like I mentioned, there are a ton of these runes, these secondary fire abilities that you have, these magical attacks, but every rune also has 3 versions of itself. There's a bronze, a silver, and a gold version. And every rank enhances the rune in some way. Some of them in less obvious ways than others, which is kind of cool. For instance, Big Mo, the second character that you get, he starts with an arcane grenade as his rune, which works pretty much like you would think. It's a big, it's a big grenade. But it does area damage, and these guys can revive those skeleton dudes, which is a problem. There we go, Crux Quarter added too. And it has a kind of a travel time as you lob it, and it has damage fall off. So the farther away from the actual area in the middle you are, the less damage it does. But rank 2 makes it to where it does more damage in general, and it removes the damage fall off, which is cool. In this case, this is a sort of X-shaped bolt firing turret, and rank 2 makes it actually reconfigure itself and fire twice. So let me just use it. That's what it does. It's good because you can cast it wherever you want. It has like smite targeting, so you don't have to worry about firing a projectile. Just like the meteors, essentially, you can cast it right in the middle of a group of enemies. And rank 2 makes it actually fire 2 waves of these projectiles. Rank 3 is even cooler because it makes the projectiles like a silvery red color, and it makes them pierce enemies, so they never stop. They just continually fire through an entire crowd of enemies, which is very useful. Alright. So this is Leap of Fate. It is a very interesting little thing. I want to get an upgrade card. It is heavily, it reminds me a lot of Hand of Fate, just, it's not the same, of course. It uses a very different combat system. It's a smaller game in general. It also costs about half as much. I personally prefer Hand of Fate because I love the theme of Hand of Fate, and I love the collection of loot and equipping your characters with cards of loot and the kind of almost point-and-click-esque storytelling of Hand of Fate. However, this game definitely has a place. It's a very interesting little game with some cool concepts. It is fairly bite-sized, and it has a lot of interesting ideas going for it, I feel, because it's fairly... its theme is neat. It's got this techno-magic cyberpunk theme, which isn't something that you see very much. I love cyberpunk and techno-magic and things like that, and it's just not something you see enough of, in my opinion. So almost any game that does it, it gets a plus from me, because I love it, and it just doesn't happen nearly enough. But in the case of this game, it uses the idea that you're trying to figure out your character's true fates and things like that, and actually figure out their futures and work your way through this crucible, which is cool. It gives you, I guess, something to work towards every time, and it also makes the game feel very different every time. Every character feels highly different from the last, for sure. And every playthrough tends to feel highly different from the last because you never know which glyphs you're going to get, besides the ones that you start with, and you never know which groups of skills in your skill tree you're going to get, and which build you're actually going to end up building towards, because, I mean, who knows what you're actually going to get. Which is cool. I would say that, you know, not every game definitely is fitting of this random skill tree system, but I would say that it's kind of a brave thing for them to try. And I think Clever Plays did a pretty good job with it, because, like I said, it's just not something I've ever seen before. And I think they've pulled it off, at least this time, pretty well. It's a game that is definitely imperfect. It's a little buggy here and there, and it's certainly limited in what it's trying to do. I can see it, you know, being a little repetitive, but the large amount of variety helps a lot in that regard. But still, you know, repetition is always a worry in games like this. But you've already probably decided for yourself if that's a problem for you in this genre. And I guess it's just something that I am really a fan of. The idea that you have this skill tree that changes every time you play. It's neat. It's a neat concept. I don't have enough mana for an upgrade, so I'm just going to see what kind of glyph I can get. Golden glyphs are awesome, by the way. They're just hard to get a hold of. Infernal Device. That's a nice one, but I think I want this back. Infernal Device is a time bomb, essentially. And we're going to just try and show you this really quick before I sign off. So, it is a bite-sized game, a fast-paced game with bite-sized runs that you can finish up in the 20 to 40 minute range, available for 16 bucks, so it's not particularly expensive, and it's the kind of game that you can probably jump into, do 1 or 2 or 3 runs, complete a few missions, and advance your favorite character or characters a little bit through their line, and feel like you've done something, feel like you've unlocked something, or otherwise just made a bit of progress. It's not something that's meant to take, like, huge, massive, I should have dodged out of that, amounts of your time, and, you know, to devote, like, hundreds of hours into. It is a much more bite-sized, small product, I think, that is meant to be experienced in bursts of gameplay. And I think it pulls that off pretty well, and I think it's priced fairly reasonably for that goal. So, this is Leap of Fate. Interesting theme. Very interesting theme, and interesting gameplay mechanics that I think meld fairly well together. It's not perfect, and it's got some issues in terms of longevity, maybe, but it is still pretty darn cool. So, yeah. That is Leap of Fate. Available right now, like I said, on Steam for $16. Feel free, if you enjoyed this video, to hit that like button. If you didn't, then feel free not to, and there's even another button for that if you want. And if you want to see anything or know anything else, just let me know. And I would say that, you know, if it looks interesting to you, maybe check it out. It's certainly got a bit of a difficulty jump in the 3rd and 4th decks that you go against, and the final 6th deck is really quite challenging. I may be, you know, doing fairly well this time, but it can get quite tricky, depending on the character and build that you get. Although, because you don't rely on item builds, per se, like you do in a lot of games in this genre, it's not as reliant on RNG or anything like that. It's mostly just reliant on you dodging properly and not getting hit by everything coming your way, and things like that. So, yeah, ooh, compass. That's Leap of Fate. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Ooh. And I'll see you next time.